All right, and welcome back. Today's little mini lecture is going to be on Wim Hof. Yes, the Iceman. A lot of people have asked about this fellow. He's kind of become a little more popular as well after a lot of the books like Breath and others have come out, many of which actually reference him tangentially, even though a lot of his kind of philosophies and teachings and what he does goes against a lot of the recommendations in that whole nasal breathing community. But let's talk a little bit more about him, what he does, what he claims, and what the science and reality is behind a lot of this stuff. So first of all, who is he? He is a 61-year-old Dutchman. Physiologically, if you look at his, actual base physiology, he's a very ordinary individual, and he said so himself. All of his parameters, he doesn't have any genetic conditions, any genetic aberrations, any endocrine issues or disorders or anything else that would lead him to have any sort of superhuman abilities that would, affect how he manages to tolerate cold and the like. And I think that's important. He's mentioned this as well, which drives home the point that everything he does and everything he teaches is supposed to be able to be adapted by pretty much anybody. Now, some of the claims of his system, things like burning fat, boost your immune system, reduce inflammation, detox your body, reduce stress, these are all directly off his website, mind you. Some of these are true, some are not. So what is fact and what is fiction? All right, does it work? Well, here's what it can do, and I'm just going to read the bullets, as usual. Improve resistance to cold. There is good evidence for this. Reducing inflammation. Good evidence for this. Raising metabolic rate. Decent evidence for this. Potentially aid in treatment of autoimmune disorders. This is a theoretical link, but one that is currently being investigated because the mechanism is very plausible and initial data is good. And potentially boost exercise performance. Again, mechanism exists, data is potentially good, but they need a few more causal links to really figure it out. If you look down below, what it cannot do, nope, no superphysiological increase in core body temperature, no supernormal or superhuman resistance to cold. It actually will not improve your sleep, even though it says that on the website. It can't cure disease. And interestingly, it doesn't strengthen your immune system. And we'll talk about how it, treats autoimmune disorders and what the potential implications are there, or pretty much anything else. So, all right, let's go through the list on this thing. How does it do these things? So the cold resistance, a lot of his breathing exercises come from this Tumo meditation. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Tumo means inner or inward fire. What is it? This is a type of meditation breathing techniques that are actually practiced by monks, and they have actually done pretty robust research on a lot of these monks. Some of the individuals even being kind enough to allow researchers to come out to them and directly hook them up to all kinds of electrodes and sensors and all that, and look at things like core body temperature, peripheral body temperature, etc. while they're meditating. Some of the older data on this stuff looks pretty exceptional and somewhat bizarre, but a lot of this is done under not very well controlled conditions. And some of the reporting was actually pretty bad. There are stories of this one monk being able to increase part of his hand, by 20 degrees, and another part of it stays the same temperature, so he can change the temperature of different parts of his hand. Of course, with no controls whatsoever. It's unknown if this is an individual that had Raynaud's. A lot of the sensors that they used were not particularly well calibrated back then, so there's a whole bunch of questions about that. But what is this technique and how does it work? Well, breathing and visualization are the two key parts of this. Now, the deep, forceful breathing is actually interesting. As we talked about during the breath review, breathing different ways can actually have an influence on your autonomic nervous system. Slow, controlled, relaxed breathing, deep diaphragmatic breaths can be very calming, very relaxing. They can lower blood pressure, reduce your heart rate, etc. And we know that rapid, deep, or tense breathing can stimulate your sympathetic nervous system, kind of the opposite ends of things, increase your heart rate, increase your blood pressure, etc. Now, what is very interesting is the Tumo breathing has a position, or it's called vase or vase breathing, however you want to pronounce it. The reason it's called that is because during their breathing techniques, during the meditation techniques, there's an inhale, a forceful inhale, and a hold, and a bracing of the diaphragm, the pelvic floor, and a lot of those other muscles. It's called the vase or the vase because that is kind of the position your somewhat protruding lower stomach looks like. It just flares out due to stomach distension. The interesting thing about this is a lot of the studies that have shown an increase in core temperature from this breathing and even an increase in peripheral blood flow, etc., actually comes from this position of tension. Now, why is that? Well, not only are you getting the sympathetic nervous system stimulation, but that actual muscular tension, that core muscular tension, radiating to full body muscular tension, actually does increase body temperature. That is a known factor. In fact, a lot of these studies, the ones that control for different kinds of breathing techniques and meditation, etc., actually show a direct correlation between the amount of bracing the individual is doing and, that apnea, which means, no breathing, and muscular tension, and an increase in core body temperature. In other words, just the breathing alone is usually not enough to result in this increase. That is important to note. Now, the other interesting thing is the meditation, the visualization itself, the thought of the inner fire. That actually allows for a greater rise time of core body temperature. In other words, these bracing and breathing techniques will raise the core body temperature, but it is the visualization of warmth, of heat, of fire, etc., that allows that core body temperature to remain elevated. That is very, very critical as well. And it shows that you really need both of them to be able to kind of extend and maintain this high core body temperature. That's actually responsible for a lot of the kind of interesting things you've seen on documentaries with, a monk sitting out in the cold, half naked, and somebody throwing a wet towel on his back, and you just watch the steam come off of it. This is actually it is a scientific phenomena that you can actually duplicate. The body is still cold, but again, you are doing so much, you're eliciting so much tension in your muscles, again, using a lot of these visualization techniques that could be potentially extending your tolerability. I mean, remember, your nervous system is very much tied into, psychology, mentality, etc. can be very much responsible for the release of different hormones, whether they be stress hormones, dopamine, etc. So there's no reason to think that this is, scientifically shaky at all. This is pretty well known. So there is, again, clinical evidence to suggest that these Tummo practices, which are part of Wim Hof, can and will keep you warm in the cold. So there's a plus already. If you happen to be a swimmer, a diver, a mountaineer, ice climber, anybody who spends time, or even if, say, you're training for bud selection or something similar, and you're going to be cold as hell, the fact that these techniques and visualization techniques, when practiced, can actually help you tolerate the cold is potentially very useful. Now, it is of note. No temperatures, tolerations, or tolerances or variations outside normal human have been registered. In other words, this is not going to allow you to elevate your core body temperature to superhuman levels. It is not going to stop things like tissue damage. Of course, remember, things like frostbite are typically caused by a reduce in blood flow as well to the extremities. In other words, the reduced blood flow actually allows the cells in your extremities to freeze and allows some of the fluid in your extremities to freeze, which is, of course, what kills the cells. If you maintain peripheral blood flow, you potentially reduce the likelihood of frostbite. Of course, that means that the body is under significantly more stress that entire time, so it's kind of a mixed bag. How does it reduce inflammation? Well, all components it shows some control over the overall systemic stress response. Stimulation of the sympathetic nervous system causes an increase, I'm reading the slide again, increase in anti-inflammatory cytokine IL-10, interleukin 10. Now, this basically the sympathetic activation of the adrenal medulla, part of the adrenal glands, actually produces more epinephrine. Now, epinephrine raises, or adrenaline, is associated with an increase in that anti-inflammatory mediator and also lowers levels of pro-inflammatory mediators like TNF-alpha, IL-6, and IL-8. So it is this sympathetic activation that actually reduces your innate immune response by controlling the stress response. So yes, there you go. Sympathetic nervous system, suppression of innate immune response. A lot of challenge studies where they introduce an endotoxin directly into the body, which is meant to cause a strong immune response, shows consistently lower immune response and inflammatory reaction in the, it's clear that these are Wim Hof trained practitioners that they are testing. So that's significant. And when we talk about potential for, autoimmune treatment, et cetera, rheumatoid arthritis is one area it's being investigated. But any sort of autoimmune condition that typically is associated with high levels of pro-inflammatory cytokines and inappropriate high levels of pro-inflammatory cytokines and inappropriately low levels of anti-inflammatory cytokines could potentially be treated by this. Why do I say inappropriately so? Well, Pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory cytokines are typically controlled in a true immune response to disease based on the need to respond to the disease itself, or respond to injury, or respond to, say, a foreign body, or anything else. So those are typically considered appropriate responses. What we're talking here is inappropriate responses. There's also, again, the importance of psychology. There have been a couple of studies that have shown that in addition to, or perhaps almost, well, yes, we'll say in addition to these training methods, the optimism itself, the psychology of the individuals utilizing these systems tends to be positively correlated. In other words, greater optimism is more positively correlated with improved outcomes in this. Now, why is that? Well, there is a pretty well-known fact that, optimistic patients typically do better as far as disease progression, disease outcomes goes. Part of that is, of course, a reduction in stress overall, which shows improved immune system outcomes, which, again, if you think about it, could be potentially going against the autoimmune impact, but whatever. If you think about like long-term, if an individual says, I have control over my stress response, I have control over my health, and they are essentially more optimistic about their outcomes. They may do things like, they will sleep better, they will perceive pain lower, they will be, a reduction in a lot of potential, pro-inflammatory, things on the stress response that are pro-inflammatory over time. So effectively, the optimism imparted by a system that claims to give you some degree of control over your own health outcomes may in itself be responsible for some of these better outcomes. So there's that. And now, talking about improving performance, hyperoxidative breathing, which is what a lot of the Wim Hof / Tumo breathing is known as, it can increase your heart rate before exercise. That means increased perfusion, metabolite clearance, less lag. What do I mean by less lag? Well, the time to get your heart rate up. Remember, a higher heart rate during exercise is not necessarily a bad thing, obviously. The heart rate is increasing because it's allowing more nutrients to get to working muscles. It's pulling away waste gases. It's bringing in oxygen, all of that kind of stuff. If you get your heart rate up a little bit before you engage in exercise, you are not going to feel that fatigue, that lag that you always feel during the first couple minutes, or maybe even a little bit more, where your heart rate still needs to climb up to reach that level of exertion. That's why when you run, the first mile always feels absolutely the worst. It's because your heart rate and your blood flow and everything else, gas exchange is not caught up to need, so you're perceiving yourself to be in a deficit that entire time. So you reduce the lag there, reduces RPE, potential decrease in CO2, which reduces that breathing drive. Remember, CO2, as we discussed in breath, higher CO2 levels are responsible for the drive to breathe. If your CO2 levels rise, remember, when you typically have to breathe during exercise, it is not because of low oxygen levels. Your oxygen levels need to nearly bottom out before low oxygen levels make you feel like you need to breathe. A slight increase in CO2 already makes you feel like you need to breathe. That is why, for example, if you've ever talked to a free diver or anybody who hyperventilates before holding their breath, that is not necessarily increasing your oxygen levels. All that hyperventilating is doing is blowing off CO2 and decreasing your CO2 levels. That is why you can black out before you have to breathe. The reason you hyperventilate is so you don't have to breathe as soon. But of course, if you don't have to breathe, then it's due to CO2-mediated levels, it's going to be a reduction in circulating oxygen that makes you have to breathe. By the time your oxygen levels are low enough to cause you to have to breathe, you can possibly be blacking out from lack of oxygen. So if you decrease your CO2, you reduce that breathing drive, which can potentially reduce the stress of exercise. Remember, when you're running or performing at a high level of activity and you feel the need to breathe and you feel a strong need to breathe, then it can increase your rate of perceived exertion, decrease motivation, a whole host of other things that can reduce performance. Also, epinephrine levels frees up energy substrates. As we know, epinephrine is associated with physical activity, is associated with greater performance. You're mobilizing more fatty acids, you're mobilizing glucose, you're enabling the body to make better use of substrates, all of that. And finally, bronchodilation from stimulation of the SNS. You're able to breathe better, you're able to breathe more clearly, potentially even you're talking about things like increasing, basically shedding of mucus, etc. So all of these things are associated with improved performance. Now, there's still a lot of mechanisms that need to be investigated. What it doesn't do. Disease and weight loss. No evidence it can cure disease other than autoimmune. Yes, a potential role for improved psychological parameters and outcomes. And because of that, it can potentially reduce illness duration or severity. But remember, the actual only noted physiological effect is a reduction in inflammation. Yes, certain diseases that are associated with, again, runaway inflammation can potentially benefit from this, but that's about it. Now, does the cold do anything? The cold exposure component of this is one of the things that fascinates people the most. Yes, there's potential for basically BAT. We're talking about brown fat activation and increasing the amount of brown fat. Now, increasing the amount of brown fat is associated with improvement in glucose metabolism and a couple of other peripheral health benefits. What's interesting to note, though, is the majority of studies that have actually tracked this, both chronic and acute and then chronic cold exposure and amount of brown fat, even show that when the amount of brown fat increases, there's often very little change in body composition, even if there's an increase in basal metabolic rate. And there is an increase in basal metabolic rate. A couple of caveats on that, though. Also, cold does increase your NEAT. You're basically shivering, so of course that is active thermogenesis. So yes, I guess potentially you can result in some weight loss if you're bringing yourself to the point of shivering a couple times a week. But the amount, I don't know how significant that's going to get. So what's going on here? The reason why we don't often see any actual clinical differences in weight here because of cold exposure is, first of all, like it says, that increase in brown fat and ability to thermoregulate is associated with individuals who have greater thermogenic capacity in the first place. These tend to be individuals who are in better physical shape. They tend to be younger already. They tend to be, again, if they are more responsive to this adaptation, then chances are they already have a lot of the factors that are preventing them from being overweight in the first place. So if you are overweight, you are older, you are probably less likely to benefit from this in the first place. So that's why we don't often see a lot of clinical differences. The other interesting thing is, remember, brown fat, that really only is doing any work in burning additional calories when you're cold. So if you're upregulating, if you're engaging in a regular cold immersion to upregulate the amount of brown fat in your body, it is only going to therefore increase your metabolism when you again are cold. So let's say you undergo a rigorous, Wim Hof style program that involves, an hour of ice baths per day, and you upregulate the amount of brown fat in your body. Well, when you're just sitting there in your house at normal temperatures, you are not going to burn any more fat than anybody else. The only time this will make a difference is if after engaging in this rigorous activity and increasing the amount of brown fat in your body, you then lower the temperature in your house to, let's say 58 degrees or so. And not only does your AC hate you, but your spouse then divorces you and, there goes the rest of life. But no, I mean, legitimately, that's one of the major caveats right there. So yes, great in theory. And if you live in a cold environment, it may potentially be beneficial, but it's very difficult to implement practically. The cold exposure alone, regular cold exposure, doesn't really do much for you in that regard. It also doesn't seem to help you sleep better. In fact, a lot of users and a lot of surveys have reported kind of the opposite. Sleep disruption is one of the biggest problems a lot of them have. It could be because of chronic sympathetic nervous system stimulation, lower dopamine levels, etc. Yes, there's a potential reduction in stress, but again, that's has to do with what we were talking about there, positive associations with stress and the idea that you're under control. But it doesn't really seem to impact sleep architecture in a positive way. The best thing I can say for it is if you sleep in a cold room, that tends to be better for you anyway. So if it helps you tolerate that at night, great. Overall, interesting, yes, useful takeaways. Psychological takeaways, effectiveness of meditation, visualization, resisting discomfort. I think everybody can benefit from this. Meditation is a fantastic thing, I think, especially even when we don't talk about formal meditation, we talk about visualization for athletes and being able to visualize dealing with stress and dealing with discomfort, etc., and being able to tolerate it, take control of stress, take control of discomfort, internalize it, and take those inputs and take the idea of exercise-related discomfort or temperature-related discomfort, etc., and own it, process it, and deal with it, compartmentalize it. That can be hugely beneficial. Those breathing exercises, usage of deep breathing and bracing to raise your core body temperature, can help with cold tolerance, raise your heart rate before exercises, warm up, etc. Again, talked a little bit of the cold adaptation section about how that can be useful. And yes, potential for treating autoimmune disease as part of a treatment regimen that could include anti-inflammatories and potentially immunosuppressants. It may be a very, very useful tool, but again, that still needs to be investigated. Less useful takeaways, cold exposure. The whole cold exposure portion seems to be a little overstated. Again, few discrete benefits beyond, again, a lot of the mental ones. If you're going to benefit from it, chances are you're in good shape already. Disease treatment, not much evidence for that. So really, as far as everything else goes, it tends to be pretty neutral. So yes, Wim Hof, there is some interesting stuff to take away here. A little bit like a lot of the breath book and the oxygen advantage. There are some interesting, verifiable scientific benefits, but I think they are often largely eclipsed by a lot of the, kind of more, I don't want to say wilder claims. I don't find that Wim Hof himself tends to make some very wild claims. It tends to be a lot of practitioners or advocates. But so there you go. For the most part, some interesting science, some good stuff to take away, and of course a lot more to dig into and a lot more than people are studying. Hope you enjoyed this one. Thanks a lot.